Hey, you want to learn how to make a circle jig so you can spin some circles and cut out some circular wood things? Watch this video. I'll show you how to do it. Oh, and maybe you should subscribe down in that region, down there. All right, enjoy the video. Play the video!
White snow, red sky, reach up for so high.
It's an age-old problem. Guy wants to cut out 54-inch circle of white oak, but guy only has dinky little rockler jig that cuts up to about 50 inches. So what's a guy to do? Well, in my case, I decided to make my own that was a little bit longer. Here's how I did it. First, I removed my plunge base for my router from my original rockler jig. Next, I ran a piece of 1/4-inch ply through the table saw. I decided to use 1/4-inch plywood to make my jig out of because any thicker and I would start to decrease my cutting ability. Now, because I was basing this off of my old router jig, I decided to use it as a template to make sure my holes were appropriately marked where I could reattach my plunge base. I also traced my old template to get the round profile on the top. Now, you don't really need to do this. You could just leave it a square of plywood, but if you're gonna make a jig, you might as well make it a pretty jig. With my desired shape traced out, I cut out that shape on my bandsaw. Then using my oscillating benchtop sander, I just sanded all of my edge profiles to get rid of any, splinters. Nobody wants a splinter in their fingy. Next, using a countersinking drill bit, I drilled out the holes to attach my plunge base to the router jig. Now, it's very important that you countersink these holes because you want those screws that attach your plunge base up inside the jig itself, or else they'll stick out and drag on your surface. Then with a 1/4-inch spiral cut bit, I stuck my router into the plunge base and, I plunged it through my actual router jig to get a perfectly centered hole where my bits would go through. Then I took the plunge base back off of the router jig, and using a Forstner bit, I drilled a 1-inch hole directly in the center of my jig. This would allow me to use bigger bits if I wanted to in the future. With my center hole drilled, I reattached the plunge base back onto the router jig. Next, we had to determine our pivot point. Now, you could make some sort of adjustable pivot point, kind of like the rockler jig that I'm building this off of, but since I just needed this to cut a 54-inch circle, I decided to just make it 27 inches down from the cutter head. Now, I flipped over the jig so it was upside down, and using a Forstner bit, I countersunk a little hole. I'm going to use this little point doohickey that came with the rockler jig because I have it, but when building your own jig, you could simply use a screw attached to the underside of the table as your pivot point. And with very little effort, we have a nice and functional circle jig, of which we can use to cut out our tabletop. Like I said, I just went ahead and used the rockler pin pivot that came with my original rockler jig. It simply just hammers into the center of the table. We're cutting this table out from the bottom, so the hole left behind by the pivot point won't be seen. Another thing I like to do before I cut out a table is actually attach my cord of my router to the ceiling directly above where I'll be cutting, and then pull it back and anchor it to the wall. This really helps when you're spinning a lot of circles, and it's nice to not get tangled up in your extension cord. Now, a lot of people, when using a circle jig and a router, think that the best thing to do is just keep spinning circles until you cut all the way through the table surface itself, but I don't really agree with this. I like to cut one circle, about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch deep, and then I like to cut away my excess wood with a jigsaw. Not flush against my original router pass, I leave a little chunk. And then what you're essentially doing here is making your tabletop into its own router template. You can then take a router with a flush cut bit with a bottom mounted bearing and go back over the edge of your entire table and smooth out your entire table circumference. Finally, I go over the edge of the table, quick and easy, with a sander until it is perfectly smooth.
Thanks for watching. I hope you liked that high quality and entertaining video. If you did, here's another video that you might like over here. And look at there. There's another video over there that you might like as well. So maybe click on one of those and watch them. And when you're done with that, click subscribe down there and you can see more videos. Thanks. Have a great day.